The storm came without warning, wild, violent, and cruel. The sky turned black, the wind screamed like a dying animal, and snow poured from the sky like a curse. Caleb Hale, a widowed cowboy and single father, was out near the creek, far from home. He knew the storm was bad, but he didn't know it would change his life forever. He rushed back through the blizzard, every step a fight. His beard turned to ice, his fingers went numb, and snow kept blinding his eyes. But all he could think about was Abigail, his 6-year-old daughter, alone in the cabin. When he finally pushed through the front door, breathless and frozen, he found her sitting by the fire, her little face pale and scared. She didn't cry. She never cried. She just looked at him with eyes that reminded him too much of Martha, her mother, the woman he had buried 3 winters ago. The cabin was small, dark, and cold. It was built with Caleb's own hands, logs, mud, and whatever hope he had left after Martha died. He had raised every beam with his bare hands, but nothing felt strong enough to hold up his grief. Since his wife passed, his world had become a tight circle: the land, the cattle, the cold, and Abigail. He did his best, fed her, braided her hair, fixed her torn dresses, but nothing filled the silence she left behind. The storm raged for 2 full days. The wind beat against the cabin like fists. The snow piled up past the windows. Caleb kept the fire going and prayed the roof would hold. Each night, he held Abigail close as she shivered, and the fear inside him grew like a sickness. What if the food ran out? What if they got sick? What if he failed again? When the sky cleared on the 3rd morning, the land looked dead and beautiful. A thick white blanket covered everything. Trees had snapped in half. Fences had vanished. The world looked quiet, but danger still lingered. Caleb had to check the creek. The cattle could be gone, or worse. He wrapped Abigail in blankets and told her not to open the door for anyone. "I won't be long, Pumpkin," he said, even though he had no idea how long it would take. He strapped on his homemade snowshoes, grabbed his rifle, and stepped out into the cold. The walk to the creek was long and brutal. His legs burned. His fingers stung. Snow cracked underfoot or swallowed his boots. But he kept going. He had no choice. Then, near the fallen trees by the creek, he saw something strange, a dark shape in the snow. At first, he thought it was a deer, maybe a dead calf. But as he got closer, his heart started to pound. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, a woman. She was face down, half buried in snow. Her clothes were buckskin, native. One arm stretched out. Her hair, long and black, was frozen in a braid. He dropped to his knees, his breath catching in his throat. Was she dead? He rolled her over gently. Her skin was pale, almost blue. Blood had dried on her temple and soaked her leg. Her lips were cracked and still. He pressed his fingers to her neck. For a terrifying moment, nothing. Then, a faint heartbeat. She was alive. Barely. Caleb stared at her, stunned. The storm should have killed her. She shouldn't have survived out here. He looked around. No tracks, no horse, no camp. She had been left or she had escaped. Maybe both. He hesitated. He thought about danger. What if her people came looking for her? What if someone in town found out he had taken her in? It would cause trouble. Serious trouble. Some folks in Redemption hated the tribes, even the peaceful ones. But Caleb didn't move away. He thought of Martha, how she had died burning with fever, and he hadn't been able to save her. He looked at this woman again, broken and cold, and something deep inside him made a choice. He picked her up. She was light like a bundle of dry sticks, but every step back to the cabin felt heavier than the last. His legs trembled, his lungs burned, but he didn't stop. Abigail was waiting. And now so was someone else. When Abigail saw him coming, her face pressed to the window, her eyes grew wide. At first fear, then curiosity. Caleb pushed open the door and laid the woman down on his bed. "Bring water," he told Abigail, "and the clean rags." The woman didn't wake. Her face was swollen. The wound on her thigh looked deep and dangerous. A piece of wood had stabbed into her leg like a spear. Caleb's hands moved with care. His heart beat fast. He cleaned the wound, washed her face, and wrapped her in every warm blanket he could find. Later that night, as the wind moaned outside, and Abigail fell asleep by the fire, the woman moaned softly. Her eyes opened, dark, wild, full of fear. She didn't speak English. She said something in a soft musical language, her voice weak and scared. "I won't hurt you," Caleb said, holding up his hands. She didn't believe him, but she didn't. Run not yet, and in that moment he didn't know it, but this strange woman from the snowstorm would change his life and his daughter's in ways he never imagined. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat in the wooden chair beside the bed, watching the stranger breathe. Her skin was pale, her lips dry, and sweat ran down her face. She tossed and whispered in a language he didn't understand. He wiped her forehead with a damp cloth, heart pounding every time her breath slowed. He didn't even know her name, but something inside him refused to give up on her. The next morning, when the sun finally rose, the air inside the cabin was thick with silence and smoke. Abigail stirred first, rubbing her eyes and looking toward the bed. "Is she still alive, Pa?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb nodded. Just barely. He had no idea what to do next. He had no medicine, no doctor, and no one to ask for help. He only had what Martha had taught him before she died: old remedies, homemade poultices, and the will to try. He boiled water and used clean cloths to press against the wound. He poured whiskey on it to clean it. The woman twitched and cried out, her voice breaking into soft sounds of pain. Caleb didn't speak. He just kept working. He didn't even notice when Abigail brought the wooden bowl of warm broth and set it by his side. When the woman opened her eyes again, they were full of fear. She tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. Her hands gripped the blanket tightly. She looked around the room, confused. Her eyes landed on Abigail, who stood frozen, clutching her doll. "It's okay," Caleb said softly. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." She didn't understand the words, but something in his tone made her pause. Caleb pointed to himself. "Caleb," he said. He pointed to Abigail. "Abigail." Then he pointed to her. "You?" She stared at him, her lips trembling. Then she touched her chest weakly. "Why? No. Nah." It came out slow, but clear. "Winona." It was the first time he had heard her name. He nodded slowly, repeating it. "Winona." For days the cabin was quiet. Caleb worked outside to feed the animals and repair the broken fence while Winona rested. Abigail stayed close to the bed, sometimes sitting with her doll and watching the woman silently. At first, Winona flinched every time Abigail moved, but slowly that fear began to fade. One afternoon, Caleb was struggling to fix the tear in Abigail's dress. His hands were too big, his stitches messy. Abigail sat nearby, trying not to look disappointed. Winona, watching from the bed, made a small sound. She reached out and pointed at the dress. Caleb looked at her, unsure, then handed it over. Her fingers were shaky but skilled. She began to stitch the fabric. Her movements were slow, but each stitch was perfect, tight and neat. When she handed the dress back, Abigail's face lit up. "Thank you," she whispered. Winona didn't speak, but something in her eyes softened. The next day, Winona sat up for the first time. She used the edge of the bed to steady herself. Caleb quickly helped her, bringing her the stick he had carved into a crutch. She took it with a nod. No words, just quiet understanding. She moved slowly, limping with every step, but she didn't complain. Caleb began to notice small things: the way Winona cleaned the cabin, folding blankets neatly, arranging pots by size, the way she added dry moss to the fire, making it burn longer with less wood. The way Abigail followed her around, asking questions she couldn't understand, but answering anyway with smiles and soft gestures. Each day, the silence between them grew warmer. Then something unexpected happened. Late one night, Abigail began to cough. At first it was just a tickle. Then it became deep and rough. Her cheeks flushed. Her forehead grew hot. Caleb's chest tightened with fear. He remembered Martha's fever. He remembered how quickly sickness could take someone away. He stayed, up all night beside Abigail's bed, holding her hand and feeding her broth. But nothing helped. At sunrise, Winona stood up slowly and picked up the old leather pouch she had arrived with. She opened it and pulled out dried leaves and roots Caleb didn't recognize. She didn't speak, just moved to the fire and began to crush and boil the herbs. Caleb watched her, confused and unsure. "What is that?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she poured the bitter tea into a cup and brought it to Abigail. The child sipped it slowly, her face scrunching from the taste. Then Winona sat down beside her, humming softly in a language neither Caleb nor Abigail understood. That night, Abigail's fever broke. By morning, she was sitting up, asking for water. Caleb looked at Winona, speechless. She had done it. She had saved his daughter. He knelt beside her. "Thank you," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how, but thank you." Winona met his eyes and placed her hand gently on Abigail's. "Strong," she said softly. Then she touched her own chest. "Pahasapa. My people. Healers." Caleb nodded slowly. He didn't know what the words meant exactly, but he felt the truth in them. Something had changed. Not just in Abigail's health, but in all of them. Something deep. Something real. Caleb knew something had changed the moment he walked through the cabin door and saw Abigail laughing. It had been so long since that sound filled the room, it made him freeze. Not the soft smile she gave when he read her stories. Not the quiet giggle when the cat chased its tail, but a full, happy laugh. She was sitting on the floor, her calico doll in her lap, and across from her, Winona was helping her braid a crown of dandelions. The yellow petals brightened the room more than the fire ever could. For a moment, Caleb just stood there. He couldn't explain what he felt. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even joy. It was something deeper, something warm and painful at the same time. The kind of ache a man feels when he sees something beautiful he thought he'd never see again. The woman he had found broken and bleeding in the snow was healing, faster than he expected. She still used the crutch he carved, and her limp was bad, but she moved with quiet strength now. She cooked simple meals when she could, gathered herbs near the cabin, and mended torn clothes with careful hands. She still didn't say much, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't cold anymore, it felt like understanding. Abigail began following her everywhere. She watched everything Winona did. She copied how she stirred the stew, how she crushed dried leaves between her fingers, how she fed the fire just right. She didn't understand Winona's words, but she listened anyway. And sometimes Winona would whisper a Lakota word, pointing to a flower or a spoon or the moon outside the window, and Abigail would repeat it back with pride. Caleb watched, all of it from a quiet place inside himself. He didn't speak about it. He didn't know how. He just did his work outside, fixing what needed fixing. But at night, when he came home, the cabin didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a home, and that scared him more than he could say, because he knew it couldn't last. The town of redemption wasn't far, and secrets didn't stay buried for long on the frontier. He tried to push the worry away. He tried to live. In the small, quiet moments, like when Winona made tea from wild mint, and Abigail hummed as she colored the floor with charcoal sketches. But every time he rode into town for supplies, the fear followed him like a shadow. It found him one afternoon. He was in the general store, loading a sack of flour and a few pounds of beans onto his cart, when Amos Blackwood walked in. Big man, red face, always watching. Caleb didn't like him. No one did. But people listened to him. That was the problem. "Hail," Blackwood said, too friendly. Heard you barely made it through the storm. That's so? We managed, Caleb answered, without looking up. Mm-hmm. Blackwood stepped closer, his boots creaking on the old floorboards. Funny thing, my nephew saw some extra tracks near your place. Said they weren't yours. Smaller. Barefoot. Woman's tracks, maybe. Caleb's stomach turned. He forced his face to stay calm. Maybe the wind made him, he said. Blackwood smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Storm's over, Hale, but you bring trouble back with you, people'll notice. Caleb didn't answer. He paid for the supplies and left. He didn't run the horses on the way home, but he wanted to. Back at the cabin, he locked the door behind him. Winona looked up from the fire, her eyes calm but sharp. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't have to. Caleb walked over and crouched beside her. They're asking questions, he said quietly. They think someone's here. I told him nothing, but that won't stop them from coming. Winona stared at the fire for a long moment. Then she nodded. Not out of fear, but understanding. That night she packed a small bag, dried herbs, a blanket, and a stone carving she kept hidden near the bed. Caleb watched, something heavy building in his chest. Abigail clung to her. You don't have to go, Caleb said, voice rough. Winona looked at him. Her eyes said what words couldn't. If she stayed, she would bring danger to him and his daughter. She knew it. He knew it too. She touched Abigail's face gently, brushing the girl's hair back with a soft hand. Abigail was crying now. Not loud. Just quiet tears. Caleb swallowed hard. You saved her, he said. You saved us both. Winona looked at him for a long time. Then she said softly, You saved me first. She turned and walked to the door, her crutch pressing into the wooden floor. But just before stepping outside, she paused. She looked back at them, at the man who had carried her through snow and fear, at the child who had laughed again, and she smiled. It was small, but it held everything. Then she was gone, and the cabin was silent again, but not empty, not anymore. Caleb thought he'd known silence. After Martha died, the cabin had gone quiet. After the storm, the land had been still. But the silence that came after Winona left, that silence was different. It wasn't just quiet. It was empty. Abigail stopped, laughing. She still played with her doll, still helped with chores, still sat near the fire every night. But her smile faded. Her voice became soft again, like the wind outside that never really left the plains. She didn't say Winona's name, but she looked at the door often, as if hoping it would open. Weeks passed, then months. Caleb tried to pretend everything was normal. He mended fences. He took care of the cattle. He made stew. He told Abigail old stories by the fire, but she didn't laugh like she used to, and his words tasted like ashes in his mouth. He didn't hear from the town again. Blackwood never showed up. Maybe he got bored. Maybe he forgot. But Caleb never forgot. Every time he passed the creek, the place where he had first found her in the snow, his chest hurt. He would stop, look at the cottonwoods, and wonder if she was alive, if she was safe, if she ever thought of them, if she missed Abigail's little hand in hers, if she missed the sound of their cabin floor creaking beneath her crutch. Winter came again, cold and cruel. Abigail caught another cough, but Caleb knew what to do this time. He boiled herbs, kept her warm, and prayed. She recovered in 2 days. But something had changed in him. He couldn't go on pretending she had never been there. One night, with the fire low and the wind howling outside, Caleb stood up from his chair and took down the small wooden carving Winona had left behind. He had kept it on the shelf untouched. It was shaped like a bird, rough, hand-carved, but beautiful. He stared at it for a long time. Abigail, he said, what if we went looking? Her eyes widened. For her? She asked quietly. Caleb nodded. They packed light. Just enough food, blankets, and supplies to last a week. They saddled the mule, bundled up, and followed the trail south, toward the edge of the Black Hills. Caleb didn't know exactly where to go. He only had Winona's last words. Pahasapa. My people. The Black Hills were a long ride, rough and wild. They passed through thick pine forests, crossed icy rivers, and camped under the stars. Abigail never complained. She kept her eyes on the horizon, searching. They asked people in small camps, old trappers and traveling traders. Most shook their heads. Some gave directions. And then, after 5 days, they found a Lakota elder sitting by a fire near a wide stream. He stared at them for a long time. Why do you look for her? He asked in slow English. Caleb looked down. Then he said, She saved my daughter. She saved me. We just want to know if she's all right. The elder nodded slowly, then pointed to the hills behind him. Go to the hollow with the red rocks. She's there. When Caleb and Abigail reached the hollow, they saw smoke curling from a small teepee nestled between stone walls. The place was quiet, peaceful. A woman sat by the fire, her back to them. She turned when she heard their footsteps. It was her, Winona. She was thinner and her limp was worse, but her eyes were the same, deep, dark, and filled with emotion. For a moment she just stared. Then she stood, slowly, leaning on her stick. Abigail ran to her. Winona dropped to one knee and opened her arms. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Tears rolled down Caleb's cheeks. He didn't wipe them. They stayed 2 nights. Caleb helped gather wood. Abigail played with the other children in the nearby camp, and Winona, she taught Abigail how to sing a simple song in Lakota. They laughed together again, just like before. On the morning they were meant to leave, Caleb walked up to Winona. His voice shook. You could come back with us. She looked at the sky, then at Abigail, then at him. My home is here, she said gently. He nodded. His heart ached, but he understood. She placed something in Abigail's hand, a small pouch of herbs tied with red string. For health, she said. Then she turned to Caleb and reached into her satchel. She handed him a carved piece of bone. It was shaped like a feather. For memory, she whispered. He wanted to say something. Anything. But his throat was tight. She leaned forward, just for a moment, and pressed her forehead gently to his. It was soft. It was real. Then she stepped back. And that was goodbye. Caleb and Abigail rode back toward redemption, the sun warm on their backs. The trail was long, but the silence between them was full this time. Not empty, because even though Winona stayed, behind she would always be with them. In every laugh Abigail gave, in every cup of tea, in every quiet, strong moment when love didn't need words. The cowboy had saved a woman in the snow, but in the end, it was she who saved him.